and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nyambura and this is 100 on Books. This is now a vest wearing channel. So today I'm going to go over the books I read till March 10th, which is till the second Friday of this month. I'm really just trying to catch up, and honestly I tried to do February first before this, and there is more than 5 books, so I figured let's try and catch up on March. Try again with the February maybe later this week. I'm recording this on March 14th, and anyway, we're doing the best we can with what we've got. So let's get into it. The first book I finished this month was A Spell of Good Things by Adébáyọ, narrated by Babajide Oyenkule and Ore Apampa. This book, I don't know what I'm saying, but this was a hybrid read. So I read the ebook and I listened to the audiobook, and it was kind of odd that I got it on release day because that almost never happens to me, but there we are. And part of the reason I was excited is because I quite enjoyed Adébáyọ's first book, Stay With Me, and also my friend Linda Barasa, who I'll share a link to, some of her online presence downstairs, had been excited about this book, plus Amin over at Lip Gloss Mafia. So on the whole, I went into this feeling quite enthusiastic, and I'm not gonna lie, it held my attention and it tackled some issues, capital I, and yet it probably will not stay with me. See what I did there? So let's talk about what this book is about. It follows 2 characters, so that we have a dual narrative. One of them is a boy from a poor family. His father used to be a deputy head at a public school. Then he lost his job during a wave of retrenchments. This will be very familiar to anybody who grew up in a global south country during the age of SAP, structural adjustment programs, and so on. And so his father is never quite able to recover from the loss of his job, and he turns into basically this very withdrawn. He read to me like a depressed man, honestly. And so the job of providing for the family falls on his mom, who, not having had much education or work experience and so on, can only do so much. So that's the one boy. And then the other character is a young woman who is doing her, what do you call it? Like, I think Americans would call it like a residency, but like in Commonwealth countries, you are a registrar during a period like this. So she's in the same general town as the boy I talked about earlier. And she comes from a wealthy family. She has gone to some of the best schools, etc. But as in a lot of global south countries, her training, for her to get her license as a doctor and so on, she'd need to work in a public hospital, which is what she's currently doing. And she encounters a lack of resources and so on that we are made to see is directly tied to the political issues in Nigeria, which is where the story is set. So this one kid, the boy, ends up being withdrawn from the cheap private school he's in and being put in a public school because his mother makes a decision to only pay his sister's fees because she's the smarter one of the two and all of that stuff. And this woman, our doctor, whose name is Wora, what happens to her? Yeah, she gets engaged to this man who, as the story progresses, is quite clear is a waste man. Derisive. But, I mean, waste man is always derisive, but I mean, like, this man just sounds like trouble. And the heart of the relationship is really that the families have known each other for ages and they're similarly classed and so on. So as with a lot of these dual perspective novels, their lives, intersect in a way that really just radically changes both of them, and this happens quite towards the end. I mean, we can see the story hurtling towards this end, but the way it happens is just very jarring. I'm trying not to spoil anything. I think the reason this book didn't hit for me is because I feel like I've read this story before. It's a story that wants to talk about, it's a book that wants to talk about the fact that no one is immune from the issues that come with bad governance, that come with corruption, that come with cronyism, poverty, a certain position within the global economy, and a mismanagement of public resources and all of that stuff. The way Ura's abusive boyfriend is thrown in, I'm sorry, that's a spoiler, was just, you know, like, it was one of those times when it feels a bit like the rich also cry. I don't know. Is it well written? Yes. Is it propulsive? Yes. Is it something I'll go back to? I'm sorry, no. And I feel like sometimes it comes across like I'm some sort of hater, you know, like I have a player hating degree. I'm not, but I don't know. I think I wanted more from the novel than what it gave me. So then next was Who the F Are You by Huda Fahmy, which traces it's a memoir. Yes, you can judge me. And it traces Fahmy's life in, you know, her teenage years as she moves with her family from, I don't remember where they were living originally, to Dearborn in the US state of Michigan, which has a large population of hijabis, and now she can no longer be defined by the fact that she's a Muslim girl. She has to essentially define herself, and it turns out the hijabiness was what was defining her. Now she's at a loss. And so we see her sort of trying to figure out who she is, what she stands for. And during that time, there's also, you know, like a wave of Islamophobia in her school that leads to her mom going to school to speak out about it, and her basically silencing her mom because she's so desperate to be accepted by these Islamophobic people. And I think it would be an interesting book for a young person to read, a younger person than me to read, you know, like this idea of really interrogating who you are, interrogating what your values are. Of course, these are questions we're always asking ourselves at some points more than others. But yeah, it was very beautifully illustrated. It was a good read. That's about it. Next was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren, narrated by Cynthia Farrell and Deacon Lee, which I read as a hybrid read. So this story follows a girl who has an identical twin and her sister's brother-in-law, her twin sister's brother-in-law, who take her sister and her brother-in-law's honeymoon because they get a bad case of food poisoning and they can't take up their, you know, honeymoon package. For context, her sister is one of those people who's constantly winning competitions and putting in, you know, her entry in a bunch of competitions. So she won this holiday, all expenses paid, all of that stuff, to Hawaii. And so she goes with her sister's new brother-in-law, whose guts she absolutely hates because she has this narrative in her head. And as with a lot of romance novels, a huge part of it pivoted on miscommunication. Like, I know I've said this before, but just open your mouth and speak. Open your mouth. Because Sis was just walking around being like, oh no, he dislikes me because I'm fat, because I have a big appetite, because this, because that, because the other, he must be, you know, a dude bro, etc, etc, etc. None of these things were true. She didn't bother to ask him, and I'm going to need people to grow up. Please and thank you. Then there's some conflict towards the end. Of course, you know, your standard third act conflict that is complicated by the fact that the sister and her husband are involved. I'm not going to spoil it here. But I actually maybe enjoyed the sister relationship better than I did whatever that dynamic was that was at the core of the story, because it really goes to the heart of some of these things by we I mean people who are AFAB or people who are femme and so on navigate, you know, like how do you go through the world wanting to have love, but also knowing that men or the people who move through the world as men do can sometimes band against you in weird ways, or sometimes don't even know that that's what's happening. I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm giving you nothing with this review because, yeah. Next was The Roughest Draft by Emily Wibberley and, did I just say Wibberley? Wibberley and Austin Siegemund-Broka, which is narrated by Dan Bittner and Imani Jade Powers. I'm sorry if you hear people outside. Yeah, this was also a hybrid read, and it follows these two writers who have previously written a bestseller romance novel, dual POV, etc., who fall out dramatically and then don't talk to each other for 4 years. But then it's a male-female duo. The woman in the duo is basically coerced, is the word I'm looking for, by her fiance to write one more book with this guy, and she does, and so we keep having these flashbacks to 4 years past, trying to figure out what it is that happened, etc. It's a romance, so we all know what happens in the end, and we figure out what the conflict was and so on. I wasn't too hot about it because first of all, like, people need to learn how to speak. Miscommunication is clearly not the thing I go in for, and honestly, I'm going to start going to Goodreads or Storygraph or whatever and reading through this stuff before I go in, because the thing that sold me on this book was a bunch of people say this is basically what it's doing what Beach Read thought it was doing. And Beach Read was okay for me. Like, for context, I read it in the early days of the Panini, and yeah, at that point I was eating up everything, but it wasn't anything spectacular. So I said, hey, you know, since I didn't mind it, why not read another book of the same sort? And I guess maybe romance might not be my thing, or maybe like this sort. Who knows? But yeah, these two needed to grow up. And it's also kind of weird to me how, on one hand, this dude basically writes himself into his stories. They write themselves into their stories. But on the other hand, they don't know how to open their mouths and speak. Like, how do you have all of this facility with words, but you don't know how to speak to each other or write each other a note or something like that? Yeah. So you can tell much is off to a great start for me. Then the next book I read was The Witchcraft of Salem Village by Shirley Jackson, narrated by Gabrielle Ducure. This is like a creative non-fiction book that tackles the Salem witch trials, and it's really short. Like, I basically gobbled it up and quite enjoyed it, actually. It follows basically the events of the trials, and I think it would pair well with I, Tutuba, which I think is by Maurice Conde, but if it's not, I'll correct that downstairs. Because Tituba is mentioned more than once in the story. I feel like it would be interesting to read a book like this that considers that period from a writer who is black, because race and gender, I feel, are at the heart of what's race, gender, class also are at the heart of this particular historical event in the US, and it would be interesting for someone who's not white, for instance, to write this. But I learned some interesting things, and I feel like it's one of those historical events that I had never actually gotten some of the context for it, and this book provides interesting context. Well, as I say, it's somehow managing to be short, so I enjoyed it on the whole. Then another book I listened to during this period is Big Swiss by Jen Beagin, which is narrated by Rebecca Lohman, Carlotta Brenton, Stephen Graybill, Jay Osmansky, and Matt Pittenger. The reason I'm not really speaking about it is that I drifted in and out of sleep with this. I think on one of the days when I was listening to it, I went swimming, or maybe like I had one of those super active days, like vest plus days, and so yeah, I slept through some bits, and I don't know, somehow I just did not feel motivated to go back to it. And then there's the fact that there's a book which I'm going to talk about in the next installment, which I hope will be an actual weekly roundup, because otherwise I'm going to start getting overwhelmed again. Sorry, but it Big Swiss, I picked it up, I put it on hold and borrowed it because I'd read all of this praise, etc, and everyone was like, oh, a book to read, etc. And what I caught was interesting, but I don't know if it's interesting enough for me to borrow it again. So what's Big Swiss about? We have our main character, Greta, in whose voice most of the novel is narrated, who's a transcriber for a therapist, like a sex therapist, who's working with this character, with this lady who she starts calling Big Swiss, the titular Big Swiss, because she's originally from Switzerland, etc. And we learn pretty early in the novel that she experienced a massive, traumatic event, and that the person at the heart of that traumatic event might soon be back in her life. And so she is trying to address that, along with some, sexual issues she has, etc. And then I slept through many parts of it, but Greta sort of gets obsessed with Big Swiss and manages to encounter her IRL in real life, and then they end up having a relationship, like a friendship or something, and there's a big event at the end. Now, if it sounds like I'm skipping through time periods, it's because these are the times when I would be awake. And usually that's not the sort of thing I would do, but it had the feel of a novel where you figure things out even if you don't go back. But also, I feel like I missed like some key moments in the process, and it might need revisiting, which is why I put it at the very end of this video, even though technically I read it in the middle, like I listened to it in the middle. Yeah, so maybe when some of the attention has died down and there isn't a 50-something year queue at the library, I'll borrow it again. Or maybe not, we'll see. There's so many books to be read. And that's it. That's all the books I've read, or I read, till March 10th. Hopefully I can be back before this camera on the 18th or the 19th, so this weekend, to talk about the books for the week ending 17th, which is this week, and get caught up at some point. But this is also not my job, so I'm trying to not stress out, because that's the thing people have been talking about on BookTube lately, and I have to agree, like sometimes you get to a point where you're just like, I have to do this, and I think it's important for me to remind myself that I read because it's a joy, it's an escape, it's a good thing, and I don't want to turn it into this chore that I have to, accomplish, or else, So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and all the good things, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.